not going to be like that. This time, I'm going to keep it practical. There's going to be actually quite a lot of facts, but the bottom line is I'm going to save you hopefully some headaches and some money. So a lot of the points are going to be a little bit general about Indonesian financing businesses in Indonesia, so in the Indonesian context. And oops, first little hiccup. Anyway, so but after that, we're going to go down into your individual cases or questions that you have. Because I've been working in Indonesia now for 7 years. I was invited to Indonesia by one of Indonesia's wealthiest people, Putra Sampurna. He sold his tobacco company to Philip Morris for about $5.6 billion. And he said, Terry, could you please come to Indonesia and set up what you put up in Amsterdam, which is to set up an online lending company. So I'm not going to talk about that, but the important thing is by setting up the first online lending company in Indonesia, I got to deal with the government, I got to deal with the police, I had to deal with a lot of fraud, how to collect cash, in far-off islands in Indonesia, how to get it back to Jakarta, a lot of headaches. And I think in the first 2 years, we lost about $2.5 million on around $5 million of loans. So we had to recoup that. So that was a real headache. But after that, we actually grew our loan portfolio to about 60,000 companies, small businesses. Most of them were women's businesses and farmers. So we would never do any consumer lending. So all the online lenders in Indonesia right now are just doing consumer lending. And the government has allowed them to charge 0.8% per day. So that's, let's say, 300% a year, which is a very reasonable rate. The government thinks here, well, not government, it's the OJK. And we were charging around 20 to 22% a year. And the good thing about financing women's businesses and farmers is that they are reliable. The first 2.5 years or first 2 years, we were financing many men's businesses, and that's where things went wrong. So anyway, I learned a couple of hard lessons here. And so what I've done is I've sort of put myself into the position of a couple of people I've spoken in the Green School community who want to set up a business or have already set up a business. And, some people really know a lot about finance, but they don't particularly know much about the Indonesian finance situation. And others really have never, set up a business or taken the risk of financing it in advance, not knowing where it's going to end up. So I'm going back to basics, and when we can. So while we wait for the presentation, I'd like to the man over there with the red beard who's smiling incessantly. Do you have a business here, or are you planning to set up a business? Yeah. Okay, cool. Do you have any idea what?
Software development house.
Oh, yeah? Okay. That's good. I know someone who's a couple of months ahead of you, so maybe you can work together with them.
Please.
Yeah, good. Anyone else planning to set up a business or has a business here? Right.
And real estate, and then we'll see. We plan to stay here a year.
Yeah.
Same as other people who live here 10 years.
Yeah, they were also planning to stay.
We plan to stay for a year 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So now as we
Good. All right. So let's see, Alex. We met the other weekend. What are your plans? Climbing walls?
Yeah, one. That's new ideas. Explore the United States. Companies offer to install solar panels on a house,
right,
at no cost to the person having to put up the house.
Mm-hmm.
That person then enjoys part of the cost savings on their new part of those cost savings are then paid to the installer of the solar panels.
Okay.
So to do that, you need investors. It's essentially, the asset is a solar panel. So you wouldn't get financing for that. The return on the investment loan, would be the cost savings, which then get paid.
Right.
I'd like to chat to you about
Interesting. Yep. Very risky model, but we'll get into it. Yeah. Yeah.
So you can explore different contractual engagements, but if the person wants to end their relationship, you go remove the solar panels,
Yeah.
and they're yours, right? So you need some kind of like revolving credit, or you'd have to be able to give it back, or link your investors' money to the contracts. But yeah.
So if you're starting a software business, you're mainly dealing with probably a couple of HR issues, and you're competing with Jakarta software salaries, Singapore software salaries, the telcos, the banks, the Tokopedias. They're all swallowing up all the IT staff. So that is something you need to consider. On on real estate, there's a couple of legislative issues, regulatory things, and also the challenge of working with local partners and reliable suppliers or not. And Alex, in your case, there's of course the interesting part of PLN, which is the electricity company here, who has to give you the right to operate, or and also certain contractual agreements on at what price you can buy back. So Indonesia.
Sorry, even if you don't feed it in.
We can talk about this more.
Yeah,
afterwards. Even if you don't feed it into the grid.
If it's, we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But yeah. So what I'm saying is you're gonna have to. It's not just about the business. There's a much wider maze of interesting challenges. Okay, so I basically want to talk about survival, number one, and then preparing, and then the funding. So the presentation was sold as a funding presentation, but I notice in a lot of discussions I'm having with young companies that they are so unprepared. Okay, so in survival, I don't know if any of you know, but basically by the end of year 3, only 10% of businesses that start today will survive. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And this is global. This is in the US, in Europe. Indonesia may actually have similar rates, or maybe better survival rates, or maybe the drop in Indonesia will be faster here and then it'll plateau because a lot of risks happen here in the early stages. So if we look at where if you look at do the post-mortem on dead companies, which is always fascinating research. It's difficult to get by because people aren't usually honest about why things went wrong. Then the number one, or actually, if I can group a lot of these points, number one issue is that the entrepreneur hasn't really fully understood who the customer is. So, for example, take Bali right now. We're still in a pandemic situation. You may have noticed that the tourist or the expat population has kind of changed from what it was 2 years ago. Not only reduced in absolute terms, but also different nationalities have come in, without mentioning any in particular. And so it means if you're going to sell to the expat community, then you better get to know that change in demographics. Also, after the pandemic, there may not be such a rush of tourism like it was before, but you are currently seeing that a lot of rich people from Surabaya, Jakarta, Medan, Makassar are actually moving here and setting up shop here. So may mean that the domestic tourism or domestic, let's say, external residents population is going to be much higher. So this is going to change the way you market your company, or it may change the taste of the company. So yeah, the other really important point is about managing cash. So almost all the companies who come to Bali Investment Club, which I'll talk about later, or to me, will always have over-optimistic financial projections. I don't know why they do that, because they're going to, shoot themselves in the foot in the future. So their revenues are high, their costs are very low, or they've forgotten a lot of costs, and so they're fundraising maybe $300,000 for the next year and a half, and then they notice within 6 months that they're almost through most of the money. So that can either be because of over-optimistic projections, or because they're really bad at managing their cash, or they just forgot a lot of things that that weren't clear to them at the beginning. Now, the third point, which is extremely important, is that a lot of people want to set up a business, tend to set up businesses with people that are similar to themselves, which is a really fatal mistake. So because you're similar background, similar education, similar tastes, so there's no devil's advocate in your team. So it is critical that you get a very diverse team. So you, let's say, have a manager, a salesperson, an engineer, and your accountant. Now, none of these personalities are similar. One's more extrovert, the other one's more introvert, the other one's specialist or generalist. So you got to get that balance. But then in Indonesia, you have a third dimension, or an extra dimension to this, and that is, you won't have a successful business. I mean, it's fine to set up, do a real estate project or a single shop on your own. But if you want to expand this out of Bali into other parts of Indonesia, it's impossible to do it as bules. You need to get your local partner, and don't get them too fast, because you may make a mistake. You may get married too quickly and then realize that you get into a lot of trouble. But not having them is having an Indonesian partner or shareholder in the company is fatal, or will just keep you small as a business. I mean, it may work really well. But for example, with my company in Jakarta, I was the only foreigner with 70 staff, and I would never go to the government. It was always my colleagues who would be the face of the company to the government. And only at the very end, when we had to get the license from the government to be able to lend online, did I have to show face. And you notice that the government officials, the OJK, would say, well, we don't want to be xenophobic. We're not racist, but you shouldn't be making decisions about this or that. That should be your Indonesian colleagues doing that. So, yeah, especially in Java, this is really strong. In Java, if you want to expand, which is where 65% of the population is, you need to have Javanese contacts. Okay, well, the list goes on, and I think some of them are quite well known. there's a point here about pricing and cost issues. Now, pricing generally in Indonesia, this is how do you say, a price-fighting nation. They like cashbacks, discounts. That's a very standard, let's say, marketing strategy here. And on the cost side, there are a lot of unpredictabilities. You know, if the Banjar or the police or someone sees that your company is really profitable and you have paid all your dues, all your taxes, they will still come and say, but what about the community around your business? You know, we expect in the next 3 months that you provide us 100 million a month to build a new road or buy a truck and a half for the village. So anyway, you probably know many of those stories. Now, I want to continue on the nasi goreng factor. So after working here for, I think, 4 years, I decided to jot down some of the issues I was constantly running into, either in my company or hearing from other fellow foreign directors. And yeah, what I realized is that Indonesians, when they go to primary school, if they ask a question and it's a stupid question or it's seemingly a stupid question, they'll get punished. If they don't answer the question from the teacher right, they'll get punished. They get put in the corner or they get to stand on a chair. The whole class is allowed to laugh at them. And so basically by the age of 12, most Indonesians have been programmed not to ask questions, not to be too critical or think critically, and also to avoid anyone losing face, especially themselves. So yeah, these are, I think, the 5 main cultural issues which, how do you say, are a bottleneck to change and innovation and growth in Indonesian companies. Understandably, from what I explained with the primary school, a fear of failure, fear of asking questions, or fear of admitting a mistake. Of course, lack of critical thinking is not because Indonesians don't lack critical thinking, it's just they don't express it. And conflict avoidance is an issue all the way up and down. It's loss of face is one of the main problems or main reasons for it. And yeah, when you have staff that don't ask questions or aren't critical about the path of the business, then you really have a problem when the leaders don't dare to admit that they don't know. So yeah, so this is a major cultural issue at corporate startups, different levels here. Now, the companies that are really managing to break through this are many of the unicorns, which are the billion-dollar companies here, because many of the leaders were educated in the States, educated abroad. They came here and they just forced the staff to ask questions, be critical, do an agile approach to business. Now, the last point, hearsay, is more, for example, I would ask my HR manager, what is the regulation on, I don't know, you know, for the staff on a certain issue. He would then not look up in the HR legislation. He would call an expert friend of his. And there's 2 reasons for that. One of them is, you know, it's easier to call someone. But the other reason, which is a little bit more hidden, is this way he can say, well, I didn't actually research it. I asked my expert friend and he's to blame for giving the wrong information. So it's sort of a halfway house of not losing face. Now, Putra Sampurna, who has about 150 companies here, he's 25% owner of Alphamart. he essentially told me if I want to set up a successful team in Indonesia, I put this in small characters just in case, you know, it's shown on video. So on the sales side, he says best get Chinese, or if you're selling in Java, get, you know, slightly higher class Javanese. On the administration, Balinese, Chinese. Of course, Putra Sampurna himself is half Chinese. Team leaders, the best are the Batak from North Sumatra. They are ruthless. They take, you know, they won't take no for an answer. They'll make sure the team's working. Now, workers, if people aren't directly from the area where you have your business, so maybe they're from Sulawesi and your business is here in Bali, that tends to work well, and ideally Muslim. So he was essentially saying to me, don't hire Javanese in Java unless you need them as a lobbyist to the government or to liaise with the police or whatever. So this is purely subjective, and there's no how do you say evidence for this, but I've seen that this sort of tends to work over the last 7 years. Okay, so these are a lot of points. Maybe this presentation is going to be online or not?
Yes.
Yeah, so there are links to further articles about what are the challenges to investing in Indonesia and what are the benefits of investing in Indonesia. As I said, I'm not going to make this an inspiring or exciting presentation. Therefore, I focus on the challenges, not on the benefits. And you can read up on the benefits yourself. But just to touch on a couple of points, if you're investing in Indonesia, find the right local partner. You are not going to survive as a big company without some kind of patronage. Patronage is critical here. Now, the other is if you're investing in US dollars and you expect to pay back in US dollars, then depending on whatever the currency is doing at the moment, it's going to be between 6, it was 11% hedging costs. So that's like an insurance against currency fluctuations. Yeah.
Yeah, just to sort of make the point that the first point, I think that I'll just, there you go. 100% agree with you on those big companies. There's a lot of people I speak to who start really small companies that don't really, they're not going to make millions of dollars, but they're going to make a little bit of money.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of those cases, it's not as critical to get a local partner.
That's right.
So just to make, in case anyone has a smaller company in mind and thinks, Christ, do I need to go out and get a local sort of lobbyist? You don't need to, unless you're going to go, if you want to make millions of dollars, 100%. But I think a lot of folks who don't wouldn't. Would that be fair?
Yeah, no, that's right. If you have a single company, I would say don't do it because it'll save you a lot of trouble. But if I'm assuming that if you're going to set up a business here and you want to expand to other islands, franchise or whatever, then that is critical. Yeah. Okay. A lot of people tend to think that it is better to set up a company in Singapore and then set up an operating company here. In terms of taxes, that is not true because you're basically setting up, you're going to have to pay taxes here. There's a lot of court rulings between Indonesia and Singapore. The Indonesians say you are going to pay your taxes here if you're operating here. And then you also have to pay taxes in Singapore. So, of course, there are maybe other constructions where you have offshore companies that could be better. Now, if you do have a company in Singapore and the money didn't arise in Singapore but came from elsewhere, and you are passing that money through Singapore into the Indonesian company, at the moment that you make profits and you're going to pass the money back to Singapore and then Singapore back to wherever it came from, you are going to pay around 20% on top of all the dividend interests and other income taxes. So they are basically, Indonesia is punishing anyone who's using Singapore as a sort of pass-through location. Yeah, generally, so I actually, when I was invited to come to Indonesia, I was asked to set up an equity online platform, so equity funding platform. But I soon realized, even though this is an Islamic country with Sharia finance, everyone prefers loans because, you know, registering someone into the Articles of Association of a business takes a lot of time. It's a hassle. It's all paper-based work. So, yeah, that's why you see a lot of these convertible loans and things like that. Let's see. Okay, so prepare. That's the second part of the presentation, and it's only one slide because it's the most important one. Prepare. There are a lot of people with ideas, and I would generally, I tell them, you know, to come back when they have a product and or have the idea further worked out. Also, usually I, as a financier, don't want to finance anything that doesn't have sales, because without sales, I really don't know whether anyone's going to buy your product. So ideally, have a year or more of sales. I'll explain to you how you can get financed without sales in a minute. Local partner and team. So generally, preparation is, okay, have your one sentence pitch. So, you know, your elevator pitch, but I like a lot of people prepare the elevator pitch, you know, spend 3 to 5 minutes explaining what their business is about, tend not to know how to explain it in one sentence. So, you know, these days people have less attention span or concentration span. Good to have a 1 minute pitch. Have a 1-page summary ready. Start when it's good and you have identified financiers or angels. Use that 1-page summary as your door opener together with other means, and get the appointment. Now, the financial model, so the spreadsheet, is not something that you will share or send around. Yeah, I tend to see a lot of businesses here coming with a 5-year financial model. It's all on an annual basis, which is kind of crazy because you don't know what's going to happen, you know, in that first year. So break it down the first 2 years into months, and then try and imagine, okay, I'm going to hire this staff, salary is this much. Oh yeah, and just before Ramadan, you have to pay the 13th month. Salaries tend to increase here by 8 to 10% a year. At least in the Jakarta or slightly larger businesses that I was dealing with. And if a member of staff, Indonesian member of staff, doesn't see that his or her salary is going up compared to their peers or their friends, they will leave for even a 2 million rupiah difference. So make sure you are sort of up to speed on what those benchmarks are. And of course, you have your product, you have your slide deck to prove that your business is really has demand. Get purchase orders, and then for the banks, think of, you know, what kind of collateral can you provide. Okay, so what funds are available here? Generally, there's 2 big segments. There's the personal loans. So the biggest bulk of this is loans up to 15 million rupiah, because a motorbike, generally a Vario, costs 15 million. And that's where the bulk of all the bank lending is going to. But you can get personal loans even up to half a billion rupiah. And then this part is basically what Indonesians call corporate loans, which is, let's say, $300,000 or more. And yeah, those are for, let's say, more serious companies. And then there's this sort of desert in between, which is for SMEs, which is called UKM. N here. And those tend to be called by banks retail or commercial loans. Now, as you can see here, the interest rates, I put the 300% interest rate here for the online lenders, so the 0.8 a day. These are for unsecured loans. Unsecured means that you have not provided a form of collateral. They're really taking a risk and a bet on you. And basically, they expect to lose half of their borrowers in a year, but they're making so much profit on the other half that it covers for the borrowers that have not paid. So the large banks like BCA will provide loans at 48%. And then you get into collateralized loans. So collateral means your house, your car, whatever, your grandmother. And the value of that needs to be 125% of the loan value that you're looking for. Because what happens when you don't pay back, they're going to sell it off at an auction, and generally they get 70% of the value of that collateral back. So they get their money back. Now, these interest rates that are quoted in by banks here are usually not quoted on an annual basis, but they'll say it's 1.5% to 2% a month. And that actually is not the effective interest rate. So that is a flat interest rate, which means if you are paying off your loan over a year, so it's a 45-degree slope, the interest fills up the rest of the space, which means the effective interest rate is going to be almost double that amount. Okay, so your effective interest rates here for, let's say, good loans are going to be around 32%. Here you see the interest rates dropping and dropping further here, but the lowest rates you can get here are going to be around 12%. Okay, so if you're starting a business and you're in the first starting up to the second year, generally worldwide, in the US, in Europe as well, 80% of the funding comes from friends and family and tools in some cases. And a portion of that funding is coming from business angels. Now, for the further years, you can look for online or fintech lending. There are about 150 companies right now registered by the OJK that are allowed to lend. And some of them are very reasonable. If any of you want to know who they are, the reasonable ones, the best ones are Modalku, Investry, Amarta, and there's a couple of others. Okay, and then venture capital is still very young here. So venture capital is either for infrastructure, for agriculture, some manufacturing, and then there's a huge chunk of venture capital equity for tech companies. Okay, so that's for financial technology or e-commerce. And as in the US, the funding that is raised through the stock exchange is negligible. It's less than 1%. So this is what you can expect. Now, how to decide whether you should get a loan or equity or some other form of finance? Well, if your company is starting here and your revenues are growing along this this dark line, so over here, this is sales. This is not your profits. Okay, so your profits are probably going to be negative here, and then coming up over here. Now, if you take a loan, because almost all the loans in Indonesia are fixed rate loans, so that means the interest rate and the principal always stays the same every month or every week, depending on what kind of loan you have. Then it means that you are not going to have enough money to pay that loan, even if you have a grace period of a year. However, if you do equity, it's great because you get money in, and then you don't have to pay anything. Once you become profitable, of course, you pay some dividends. But then once the exit takes place, there's a massive payment. And people very often think that loans are more expensive than equity. It's not true. It's the other way around. Equity is, you don't feel the pain because you don't actually have to pay someone, but you've given away, let's say, 10 to 20% of your company. And if you had that 10 or 20%, then you would have made all of this money as well. So, it's just something to bear in mind. Now, with the Bali Investment Club, what we tend to do is we're looking for young companies that have a year or two of sales. And we couple the payments to your sales. So it means you don't pay when you don't have the money, but once you cross this line here, which is the interest rate you're paying on loans, the big payments become more expensive, which is good for us because it means you are going to be looking for a bank loan to pay off the Bali Investment Club loan. Okay, because it's cheaper for you at this point to get a loan rather than continue sitting on the Bali Investment Club loan. Okay, so what type of finance is cheap or expensive? Now, if you succeed, as I just explained, if you give 20% of your shares to an investor, you're going to be paying them a lot. You don't feel it again because you decide to share the company with someone else. Then at the bottom, if you succeed, the loan is probably the cheapest. Now, the Bali Investment Club loans are going to be a bit more expensive because we put a lot of effort into the businesses to make sure they are coached properly. And angel finance will be somewhere in between. So does anyone not know what a business angel is? Have you never seen them flutter around? They're all over the place. No, so business angel is someone with a lot of money, usually an ex-entrepreneur or has a company and likes to invest in new businesses. So they will tend to either provide a loan or take a small share as a risk in a company. So the angel is because they were an entrepreneur before, they are very active investors. So they love to sort of coach and help the entrepreneur through the first stages. Yeah. Now, if you fail, if your business fails, the investor who had the shares is going to lose out with you. So it's nice and cheap because you don't, it's too bad he was a shareholder. The angel will, depending if they provide a loan or equity, will suffer the same fate. With the Bali Investment Club, we try it depending on the risk of the company. We are putting in terms related to, okay, well then you have to pay this much collateral back to us, or we get a share in your company and all the assets, a big share, and then try and make something of that business. Now, if you fail, the bank is going to come and get your collateral and auction it off. So, yeah, that's Shylock's profession. Okay, what is quick and slow? So personal loans at Indonesian banks, you can get them very quickly. Some cases 1 day, some cases a week. If you're a foreigner, it'll probably take a little bit longer, maybe 2 weeks. With us, with the Bali Investment Club, we will let you know within 1 or 2 weeks whether we can deal with your business. But to actually close the finance is going to take about 2.5 months. Now, the larger corporate loans in Indonesia will take around 2 to 3 months. And a loan which is very interesting for some of you here. So, Kud loan is it's a subsidized loan by the government, which is offered only once to SME businesses, so small and medium-sized businesses. and they are only given by the state bank, so Mandiri, BNI, and BRI. And they're very cheap. Okay, and equity is usually a very long process of haggling and figuring out, okay, how are we going to do the share purchase and sale. Okay, there are other ways of financing your business rather than going to banks and investors. So you can actually finance through your suppliers or your buyers. So for example, if you are able to get a purchase order from a buyer, especially a buyer that has credentials in Indonesia, you can probably go to an angel investor and say, could you upfront finance us based on this purchase order? You're allowed to talk to whoever the buyer is if you want, just to check. But then we'll provide maybe 80% of that purchase order in advance. And then you have to probably pay a hefty interest rate on that as well. Okay, you can also get your customers to pay on time. That helps because then you get your money in quicker. And there's also factoring, which is you can sell your invoices usually at around. So you've sent an invoice to Green School for supplying something, and Green School is just not paying you. So you could actually go to their specialized companies. They will give you around 70% of the value of that invoice now, and then they claim the money from Green School. So that is a whole business in itself. Okay, and then expenses. So you're a startup, don't pay salaries, give some form of options is an option. And then, of course, you can be really nasty and tell your supplier, sorry, I can't pay this month, I'll pay you next month. Could we delay a little bit? And then on fixed assets with Bali Investment Club, we're looking at a seaplane business in Mentawais. And buying a seaplane is really expensive. It's going to cost more than half of setting up the business in its own right. So we have asked the supplier of the seaplane to provide the plane as equity. So they'll get a share in the company for providing the first plane. So that is a way of doing it. And of course, you have leasing, or you can offer, which is roughly the same as seaplane, offer equity for the asset. Okay, crowdfunding. Sorry, this is, I told you this is not going to be an inspiring and exciting presentation, but it's a lot of information. Crowdfunding, a lot of people see, Alleluia stories from Kickstarter and a lot of other crowdfunding equity or loan crowdfunding platforms, but you're only seeing 10% of the cases. So Kickstarter, I think, is a 12% success rate for businesses or projects achieving target. So the rest are not achieving that. And of course, Kickstarter is making a lot of money on registration fees and whatever. So this tends to be the norm. It's actually also the case in the venture capital world. So a venture capital fund receives 100 proposals, they will only fund about 5 to 10 of them. And the other issue is if you get loans from outside and you're earning money, so your customers are paying in rupiah, you're going to have to convert that money back to dollars or euros. So that I would just generally discount around 7% of your revenues to cover for fluctuations in currency. Okay, loans I covered. So if I were you, if you want to go to a bank, go to these banks. They're the largest ones, the safest ones in the country. These are fully guaranteed. This is a commercial bank. Now, an interesting approach to getting a loan rather than offering collateral is get someone else, maybe a sugar daddy or something, to put a deposit into the bank. So let's say $125. That sugar daddy is earning 6% on the deposit, which is roughly what you could get here. And then you borrow from the bank at, let's say, 11, 12% against the deposit, which is sitting in another bank account. Okay, so you see the spread here is 5 to 6%, which is common here. Okay, here is a list of different investment funds, which will not consider anything under, let's say, 300,000. And the list is quite long and it's growing by the day. Most of these funds are focused on tech investments, so anything with a mobile app or blockchain in it, then tends to open more doors for some reason. And there's also a lot of funds in Singapore. So if you're looking for any specific type of fund, I have a list of them. And then finally, the Bali Investment Club. So we're looking for businesses that have at least a year's revenues. We are currently looking at negotiating a deal with Indosol. SmartMates is a IT company here in Canggu, run by an Aussie, and we have a couple of larger deals in the pipeline. So the difference between us and other financiers that we provide a lot of coaching and support, and the team is here, and they really put a lot of effort into supporting your business even before you get the funding, because we have to tidy everything up before we decide to really provide the funding. So we've currently already looked at 30 businesses and rejected about 25 of them. So we are currently in negotiation with about 5. And generally, you will end up paying 2.5 times what we provide in finance. This is a very rough ballpark figure, but spread over 5 years. So that comes to around 20% return on investment. Silence. Okay, I'll stop talking. Was that clear? I haven't seen anyone fall asleep yet, but I tried to cram as much information as possible in for those of you looking for answers. Yeah. Any questions?
Just because the online people can hear as well.
Mm.
Yeah. Hi. How many companies have Bali Investment Club invested in so far?
In one, and it's one that is not being presented yet. So it's a resort being built in Uluwatu with a Balinese architect and construction firm. So on June 18th, we'll have our launch event at the Shoramora Hotel in Pererenan. And there you can see the full scala of deals. Yeah.
Okay, because my second question was supposed to be, do you have any companies that could roll into Europe? But it doesn't look like it can be rolled into Europe easily, because we have investment funds in Europe that would love to get any sustainable ideas and businesses. So this is for the audience as well. We have the investment funds, but unfortunately the companies would have to be established in Europe as a subsidiary company, and then provide services in Europe as well, because we use the European investment funds. So
Right.
this may be an area for further cooperation later on.
Yeah, no, interesting, certainly. Yeah, I heard there's a fund of 80 billion euros for that purpose. Yeah, okay.
That's the one.
Yeah, okay, cool. Any other questions? Anything you, yeah?
I'm looking at the figures for the rates. Loan of, can you get a loan from outside of Indonesia?
Well, the thing is, everyone has sort of already figured out.
Can you repeat the
Oh yeah,
question?
so can you get?
I was asking about the rates for financing. The rates of interest are very high. And I asked the question if I can get, as a company, as a new company, get finance from abroad, outside of Asia, at cheaper rates, of course.
Yeah, but you can, but you are then paying maybe, I don't know, 6 to 8% on the US dollar. And then if you add in currency fluctuation over, so I calculated over the last 14 years, it was, you would have lost 5.6%. So that's, let's say, if you add 6% on an annual basis, then you're almost coming into the same amount as here. No, the banks have figured that one out. Yeah.
So, Thierry, I mean, so it's fairly new. Do you know of other guys doing this? And would you say you were in a sort of a more expensive sort of section because you help the companies, or are there cheaper guys? Because a couple of the companies I've spoken to, sort of when they're looking for funding, they see the debt sort of amounts and they don't like it.
Yeah.
And it's just it kind of crushes them a bit. I'm just wondering, where is this the reality of Indonesia and everyone's kind of raping everyone and you're being a little bit better, or are you sort of, how are you positioned?
Well, about 4 years ago, I tried to set up the first impact investing fund here, and there was none. And impact investing meaning only looking for businesses that have a social or environmental impact. And no one else is really looking in that space. There are now about 2 or 3 funds like that, but they have sectoral focus. So there's a big agricultural one. They won't look at anything else except agriculture and food. So yeah, the answer is no. There are no other players not in Bali that I know of. I've tried setting up a sort of angel network here a year ago, but this is the first time that it's the beginning of a true investment fund for Bali focused on impact. Yeah, that's the only reason I decided to join them and help them, because I thought this is a worthwhile legacy before Heiko and I return back to Holland.
So is it a VC fund structure and you have LPs and stuff? Is it
not yet? Not yet. At the moment, it's we have, let's say, 3 deals, and you can decide to, as an investor, put 20 or 50,000 into this one. So you actually provide a direct loan into those businesses. Within 12 months, we will apply for the venture capital license.
I guess just to follow on to that, are you looking for investors into the Bali Investment Club as well? Or, I mean, you've gone over what you can provide to small companies. Is Bali Investment Club also looking for investment in itself?
Let's say for the next 6 months, we don't actually need any funding. It's a very low shoestring operation. We have about 5 members of staff that we are paying. So I think our operating costs are just over 10,000 a month, and so it's relatively low. But once we start applying for the license, and then we set up a proper fund structure, yes, that's the moment that we need investors. And also to apply for the license, there's going to be a lot of costs involved in that, because you have to pay auditors to come in and check stuff. You have to register with the OJK. Yeah, lawyers have to be paid, who are usually very expensive people. So then, yes, so that's maybe in 8 months' time. But I would say just go check out the deals on 18th of June at our launch event, and then you can meet the founders.
What kind of support do you typically provide for the companies? Could you just say a little bit more about the type of coaching?
Yeah, so a couple of the businesses that we actually decided to not continue with what they were left behind, so this was before we actually invested, is their financials were up to shape. They actually made changes in how they would focus on certain products. So one of them was a food delivery company. They decided to start selling more processed foods, and we also connected them to buyers in Jakarta. So this, we put quite a lot of hours into it, and then we didn't invest. The other one was selling a very high-end brand. You probably know them, Terra Water, one of the water filter companies. They were focusing a lot of their effort onto their, 2 million or 3 million rupiah water filter. But the true demand lay in the 300,000 rupiah filters. But people didn't want to buy the sort of cheap plastic-looking filter bucket. So they put quite a bit of coaching and effort into that, as well as the financials. Now, after the investment, we see our role in connecting with potential buyers and suppliers.
Amazing. Any other question in the audience? Francis, not ready to get your first million of loan?
I'm investing, darling.
You want to invest?
Yeah,
okay. Does anyone have any other questions? Thank you, Thierry. Let's just give another round of applause.
Thank you.